Hello, I'm Donk Orleone, and today we're going to talk about brain-solving the flop, the art of creating strategies on the fly. It's true that the majority of spots you shouldn't really try to brain solve per se. You should have a lot of spots memorized or at least planned for. Right? You should have a plan for what you're going to do when you open the button and big blind defense and there comes Jack 10, 3, 2 tone. Right? It happens so often that you need a plan. But there's many unknown spots where maybe you have a different stack size, someone limped, or someone used a different size from what the solver would use, and you end up in a spot where you could either try to still do what you saw in the solver without adjusting, which is not the best thing you do, or actually try to adjust and crush your opponent's actual range in all of those spots. So we need to try to take preflop sizings and effective stacks into account when giving our opponent a range. Not only that, but things like limps or things like lines that someone could take preflop that are not necessarily solver approved. And not only that, but also adjusting to their actual ranges. Maybe someone has a leak preflop. For example, they could overfold on the big blind versus steal. And on the flop, their range is going to be different. And their strategy is also going to be different. If someone has a stronger range on the flop than they should, they might not fold as much as a solver would fold. So we need to stop autopiloting and start punishing our opponent's hands. The first concept we need to define is the relative width of the defender relative to our range. So this is how wide the defender's range is compared to the aggressor's. For example, if the aggressor used a smaller size preflop, the defender's range will be relatively wider than if he used a bigger size. Let's do a little bit of a quiz. We are effectively 300 big blinds deep, button versus small blind. We are the small blind. The button opens to 2.5 and we 3-bet to 12. Very, very, very deep stack and a relatively not that huge 3-bet. And the button defends versus 3-bet. The flop is going to come queen 7 deuce rainbow and we have a few options. We can bet a third, we can check, we can bet half pot, we can bet 2/3. What is the strategy going to look like? The answer is a range bet for a third. Why is that? Well, let's look at what's going on in the sim. As you can see, all of the three sizings are being used, but if you were to simplify this to one sizing strategy, a more simple one, a range bet for a third or 40% pot would be the highest EV to play this. On the flip side, 100 big blinds deep, the strategy changes to a half pot for around 65% frequency. And why is that? Well, first of all, and really the most important point, is that the preflop ranges change vastly when the effective stack changes. 100 big blinds deep, our 3-bet range looks like the standard 100 big blinds 3-bet range, and so does the button's defense range. So lots of suited connectors, pockets, suited broadways, suited ace-x, and some offsuit broadways. But 300 big blinds deep, it looks way different. There's all of the suited gappers, 5-3 suited, 6-4 suited. There's some more hands like king 7 suited, jack 8 suited. Now there's pure deuces, almost pure ace 2 suited. So as you can see, it's quite a wider range, and not only that, but a weaker range, right? It's missing some of the offsuit high card hands, which perform well on the majority of dry, high, and medium boards, and they are being substituted for hands like 6-4 suited, 5-3 suited, which perform really, really badly on the majority of boards, but extremely, extremely well on some specific boards. So for example, if we changed the board to something like 8-6-4, which 100 big blinds deep, it's not really that bad, right? Because the in-position player doesn't have straights, right? He's not going to defend with 7-5 suited preflop. He's not going to defend with 8-6 suited, with 6-4 suited. When you are 300 big blinds deep, he has all of those hands almost always, as you can see here. Not only that, but he has the SPR behind him to benefit those specific hands. If you're 100 big blinds deep with an overpair on a 3-bet pot and your opponent has 2 pair, well, so be it, right? But if you are 300 big blinds deep, now your opponent can apply much more pressure, both with stronger value than an overpair and with bluffs to eventually potentially make you fold that overpair. So in general, your EV goes way down on a board like this. Let's talk about some of these ramifications from the relative width of the defender's range. With a relatively wider range, that player is going to be weaker across boards, across the majority of boards at least. So you will see higher c-bet frequencies against that particular range. On the flip side, with a tighter range, it will be stronger across boards and you will generally see lower c-bet frequencies against that range. The bottom of a wide range has less equity. So when you want to attack that, you want to use small sizings. The bottom of a strong range has more equity. So to attack that, you need to use bigger sizings. A wide range will usually be very asymmetric. Imagine opening to 2x from UTG and the big blind defending. This is a very wide range from the big blind because of the small sizing, just a 2 big blind open. It's very, very asymmetric compared to UTG's range, which is very, very tight and high card based. So in that particular matchup, if 7-5-3 two-tone, for example, comes on the board, it will massively hit the big blind compared to UTG. On the flip side, when it's relatively tighter, let's say you open a little bit bigger from the button and the big blind defense, now both ranges are going to look a little bit more similar. A board like 7-5-3 two-tone is not going to hurt the button nearly as much. The button is going to hit straights and 2 pairs and is going to generally do okay-ish on a board like that. So to illustrate the point, let's look at a board like Ace-10-6 Rainbow, button versus big blind single raise spot, but we're going to make the button open to 3 big blinds instead of 2.5. That makes the big blinds range significantly tighter. As you can see, when we give the solver the option to bet really small or for a pot size, it pretty much exclusively chooses the pot size. If you were to simplify this strategy, the highest EV way to do it would be to bet big at a low to mid frequency and basically ignore the small bet. The reason for this is the lack compared to when we open to 2.5, the lack of hands like 7-3 suited and these sorts of things that are very, very low equity. Even hands like Queen Deuce, something like that. On the flip side, there's going to be a higher density of Broadways. There's going to be a higher density of high cards that have more equity, right? It's going to be a stronger difference range, and it will have a higher bottom of range, a higher equity bottom of range. On the flip side, if we open to 2 big blinds instead, what we can see is that we're just range betting for a small size. You could still simplify this strategy to a pot size or check if you wanted to, and that would be completely fine. But it seems to be that the small size really, really performs well. Well, the difference is that now that we open to 2 big blinds, there's a lot of these hands like 8-7 off. Well, in this case, 8-7 is a draw, but there's a lot more Jack Deuce, 7 Deuce, 8-3, 8 Deuce. Lots of really, really low hands with really, really, really low equity. The overall range is weaker, and also there's more of an incentive for the button to bet tiny with marginal hands to fold out really, really low equity, which didn't happen as much on the previous scenario. So, what affects relative width? Mainly, effective stack, as we saw, the preflop sizing itself that we or our opponent used, and the opponent's specific tendencies. For example, if our opponent overfolds versus a button steal, he will get to the flop with a tighter range, and we could punish that range further by not necessarily range betting for a small size, but maybe using a more polar strategy with a bigger sizing and more checks. On the flip side, if our opponent is very loose and he gets to the flop with a wider range than he should, we will punish that range further by betting at a very high frequency with smaller sizings. To summarize, don't autopilot whenever you get into one of these unknown spots. Think about the relative width of the ranges involved based on the preflop sizing, the effective stack, your opponent's specific leaks, and try to use the proper size and frequency versus your opponent's actual range. That's all for today. I hope you liked it. If you want to keep seeing more content like this, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next one.